Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Enchantress, and if you're wondering why I'm reviewing this character first, it's because I'm still waiting to unlock Odin's potential so I can take him to level 80, but from what I've seen so far, Odin seems to be the best level 70 character in PvE at least. The other characters, Malekith and Angela, don't really seem that great to me from initial testing, but do have some usage outside of their leadership and supports, which I'll cover in the follow-up video probably because Odin's potential is gonna take a while. Besides Odin, Enchantress also seems to be one of the highlights for this update, since she not only is a great support now for villain characters, but also performs pretty well as a standalone character and has a pretty effective leadership for modes where you can amplify your effects, such as for Dispatch, where you can increase the defense down and clear the mode quicker. Surprisingly, the character also did decently in PvP due to how her AI and kit functioned, but she won't really be a top performer, more so somewhere around the mid-level and potentially able to take out some metas depending on how you build her, but you'll see that a little later in the video. My build on her is pretty basic. I only have 4 and 5-star Urus, no artifact, and a 4-second invincible obelisk with guard break immunity. So essentially I'm not using a damage proc, and she has room to perform better if you build her up even more. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is that the character is likely useful to newer players. I know that she is a premium character with a premium uniform, however if you are able to get her bios, get her to T2 and put her uniform on, she will provide you with a lot of value in terms of the leadership that increases all defense down, that ignores immunity, which she also has at 60%, and I believe goes up to 84% with that leadership. But on top of that, she also has a lot of CC effects, which is really useful when you're a newer player and need to lock down those World Boss Ultimate bosses, which she can pretty much do indefinitely. To add to that, she also has the great support passive that increases attack by 20%, damage versus bosses by 40%, and if the character deals mental damage, which she does, they also get another 30% additional damage on top of that. So she's essentially providing villain characters with up to 90% offensive stats, including herself. As I mentioned, the character also has a ton of CC that can perma-lock down World Boss Ultimate bosses, with the exception of Thanos. She has 3 seconds paralysis that ignores immunity on her 2nd skill, and then 4 seconds paralysis on the 4th skill. She also has great standalone damage, and all of these together is the reason why even at T2 I'm able to beat stage 99 of Thanos within about a minute and 40 seconds. Black Dwarf doesn't have the CC immunity that Thanos has in his 2nd phase, which is the reason why I can essentially clear it in around 30 seconds. T3 does add a good offensive improvement to her, but it's kind of hard to see versus Thanos since I'm completing the stage so quickly. The T3 was able to shave off about 20 seconds from the clear time. Don't forget that Thanos' 1st phase doesn't have CC immunity, which is one of the reasons why I can essentially skip to the 2nd one just by spamming the 2nd and 4th skill that have paralysis to keep him locked down from going into those animations. I'm able to clear Black Dwarf about 10 seconds faster, and if I had a damage proc, she could basically just one-shot the boss. If you're a veteran player, the CC effects and the all defense down likely doesn't mean much to you since most modes don't really utilize them, but keep in mind they do work in things like Dispatch and Dimension Rifts, so if you're using a villain character there, she will be a great leadership character and support since she has both functions, and you can essentially lock down the opponents. She also does a lot of damage because she can go to T3, unlike characters like Black Cat. So you're effectively looking at what could be the best leadership support combo for those modes if you're using a villain character. Keep in mind that Black Cat is in contention with her, but you do need her uniform, which you can only get with tokens during the seasonal events, and that character also really needs her artifact to be able to provide as good a support capability as Enchantress can with this uniform. If you want to build Enchantress specifically for PvE, I would probably recommend using a Judgment since she won't really be used in ABX and ABL modes as a standalone, but if you do want to use her in those and possibly Giant Boss Raid, then a Rage would likely be the best option there. However, the character is also proc friendly, so you could just as well utilize a CTP of Energy or a CTP of Destruction. Basically have a lot of options in terms of how to build her for PvE. As you can see from the initial test versus null, where I'm not using a leadership or supports outside of her own and have no damage proc, I'm able to complete the fight in about 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is well ahead of some of the other PvE characters. So she is essentially above average compared to them. Because she did so well in the first test, I decided to repeat it on stage 29, again with no leadership, supports, or a proc, and she essentially was able to complete it. I did end up dying, but it was only with a sliver of health left, so she definitely can complete this, especially if you play her a little bit better and have a little bit better of a build. However, compared to some of the other female characters that I've tested on this same stage, they were able to complete it with about 40 seconds remaining or more, which means that the character doesn't seem to perform as well in the higher stages, mostly because I've noticed she doesn't have ignore dodge in her kit whatsoever, so it becomes much harder to be able to land hits consistently and perform a consistent amount of damage once you go to the higher stages where that particular stat plays a bigger role. The rotation that I tested for her was to do a 3 slight delay cancel after she goes up in the air into a 4 cancel 5. 5 is the one that you want to proc on and the skill that you want to finish on. Then when you have access to your T3 skill, you can do 1 and 2 cancel throughout your rotations to fill up the T3 faster. But when you do have your 6th skill, you essentially want to open with that, do a slight delay cancel once the green kind of aura and animation start. Then you do your regular rotation of 3 delay cancel, 4 cancel 5. If you're using a single skill damage proc, this might be a little bit tricky with the ultimate skill since there are some lingering hits that might throw off your proc. However, I think you can still make it work. But I did recommend a judgment since I think it's much easier to play her with that because of the lingering hits. You can see that even though she lacks the ignore dodge, with an added leadership and support and no damage proc, she still is capable of finishing a stage 39 of null. You're not really going to be using the character in ABX and ABL as a standalone, mostly because there are far better options, but also because she doesn't have the cancel effects outside of the paralysis for the different seasons. Regardless of all this, I still tested her with no damage proc, and she was able to score a decent 8.1 million, which means that she can reach around 9 million with a single skill damage proc, and about 2 million more than that with something like a rage. With that aside though, this character is meta for Alliance Battle Extreme, and I'm not sure if she is for ABL, but I know for sure she is for Alliance Battle Extreme just because of the support capability that she provides. There isn't really any other blast villain support character that you can get on the team to complete a 3-person team outside of Cyclops. So for the most part, people have just been using Cyclops as their support. And now that Enchantress is here, they can finally complete that team and get another support to get even higher scores. So for people who are competitive in ABX and possibly ABL, then she is a staple character that you're going to want to have. The character isn't really anything too special in PvP, but she does perform consistently in the mid-level and can potentially take out some meta characters, or at least just one of their lives. The main reason for this is because the character's AI focuses the 5th skill, which not only is a high priority skill, but is also an iframe that has a little bit of invincible on it and deals a high amount of damage. So the character can essentially just jump right into the 5th skill, avoid taking a lot of damage while also outputting a high amount of it herself. I haven't really seen the AI focus any other skills besides maybe the 3rd, so it just keeps going into the 5th skill, which provides her with that protection from the iframe, the invincible, and also provides her with healing and a high amount of damage. So it actually does end up working. In terms of her build options, I would say that if you're fighting versus meta characters or plan to use her as an option to take out meta characters, then a CTP of Destruction would be your best bet there, since you need penetration to go through the opponent's invincible, and you do want a high amount of burst damage to be able to counteract them filling up their top procs for any mighty CTPs or anything like that. You can see what I mean versus Thanos, where I didn't have a damage proc and I didn't have enough burst damage or penetration to go through his invincible and healing before he was able to iframe ignore and take out Enchantress. You can also see from this clip what I meant about the high skill priority on the 5th skill, even with Thanos' own 5th skill coming in where he's in iframe. As soon as he comes out of iframe, Enchantress goes immediately into her own iframe on her own 5th skill. If you don't really want to chance any fights versus metas, then I would say a CTP of Authority followed by a CTP of Regen would likely be decent options for her at the mid-level and would make her more consistent versus those characters, since they're less likely to be able to burst you down quickly because they don't have those tools. You can kind of get an idea what I mean in Alliance Conquest. I took her up against a Null and a Mr. Sinister, and because Null has such a high cooldown on his iframe ignore and Sinister doesn't have an iframe ignore at all, they had a really hard time being able to hit her because she basically would just keep going invincible through the 5th skill and from the custom gear, and would just hide in those iframes while dealing a mass amount of damage. So again, versus meta characters this won't really work because they do have those tools of iframe ignore and penetration, so depending on how you want to use her, then you would want to build her accordingly. I'd say that Enchantress is actually a good pickup for most players. For newer players, she has a really good leadership and CC effects that really help out in World Boss Ultimate, and for veteran players you still have that benefit in things like Dispatch and Dimension Rifts, which you can clear faster with particular villains and get more rewards because of the additional clears. On top of that, the character also has the clear benefit in having an additional support in Alliance Battle Extreme to help you get higher scores, potentially get rewards that you couldn't before. And if you're competitive in that mode, it allows you to actually still stay competitive. The character should also be helpful in World Boss Legend, depending on the restrictions that you face, but if it is a blast villain, then she should prove useful there. And lastly, for Alliance Conquest players, you have the good mid-level to potentially high-level usage, because the character just constantly stays in iframes while dealing a good amount of damage, provides support to other characters, and potentially can lock down opponents if they don't use any CC cleanse or debuff leaderships. From what I've seen so far, I don't think Angela and Malekith will provide as much utility as Enchantress does, but I'll cover that in the following video. And then hopefully I can get Odin's potential, and that won't take too long as well. If you found this video entertaining or useful, then please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment, possibly sharing it with others so it can help them out as well. And as always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch these, so thank you, but the video is now over.